Um, okay, welcome to class, everybody. We have a visitor, Jake Miller, today. Just a couple of things before we get into the conversation. Um, uh, I've generally been flexible about people turning in stuff late and stuff, but Canvas gives me notifications just like it gives you notifications about stuff that I need to do. And so, like, after an assignment is due, like the one this weekend was due, for people who didn't turn it in, I just entered zeros. But I'm not really that concerned about things coming in late, as long as they're not like really, really late. Um, but if you're getting notices like, oh, like you have a zero or an F on this assignment, just like know that you can upload your stuff. I just do that so that I don't get snowballed under my own to-do lists in Canvas. But for the people who posted stuff last week, the character study where you did a cover of someone else and then you did your own original song, I thought that was really helpful in people's aesthetic statements for how they were doing things differently. It was really, really advanced in this class. So I just wanted to say thank you for that type of work that you're doing. The work that's coming in is really pleasing to me. And then one last thing, this week you have those Pat Pattison lyric writing exercises that are due for the next chapter in the book. So it's challenge number 2. It should be all of the exercises. It's okay what some people have done. Some people have just been taking photographs on their phone of like their journal writing. That's fine. Yeah, I'm kind of checking it in to make sure that you've done it. And then and that's it. It's kind of like a you've done this or don't do this, like a pass fail type of grade. And I'm going to give you some editing exercises this week for taking those like prose exercises that are showing up and converting them into um, lines, like poetic lines and stuff. And so that just be on the lookout for that kind of information that will hopefully help you take that material and start plugging it into uh, uh, like song lyric type of material and not just kind of writing exercises. Any questions on that stuff before we get going with Jake? And did we just okay? Then without further ado, I'll just introduce you all to Jake Miller, who, as you know, hopefully got to listen to some of his stuff. Jake has been booking at various different places in town. Up until COVID, he was also traveling a lot and doing a bunch of touring and playing guitar for Esme Patterson sometimes, who Esme visited one of my dime classes last semester. Played a bit in Porlolo, and Aaron Roberts of Porlolo is going to be with us in a week or two. And Was doing kind of booking agent work from on the road. And now he's got some new projects that he's interested in as he's sort of transitioning under COVID. And then, of course, he's got an ongoing project with Anna Morset called Still Tide, where he's a main kind of co-songwriter in that particular period. So um, these things are informal. These discussions are informal, and they're really up for students to ask you questions. But maybe we could just have you talk about kind of the things that you're thinking about after COVID. And I know that you and I have talked about some of the projects you have for like going forward.
Yeah. Um, well, first, thanks for having me. I hope that, you know, everyone enjoys the talk. Um, and yeah, I guess music is weird in case no one's noticed. Like we can't be in places right now. And I don't know, I think it's very, the sort of logistics of booking or playing shows right now are pretty complex. I'm sure we'll get into that more. But for myself, I'm I'm currently just like getting back into writing and playing my own music, which I haven't done in like 6 or 7 years. And then also, I'm working on studying and applying for uh, graduate degrees to start school next year. Um, and I'm pretty excited about that. Roger's given me some good books to read, which are really awesome. I finished that Lyre of Orpheus one.
Oh
Thanks for
yeah,
that,
that's a
man.
good book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Um, but I guess also trying to figure out, uh, what do I love? What do I need about music, about performance? You know, because so much of it is not available right now, and I think that uh, that's different for everyone. Obviously, some people love writing, other people love performing, some people it's both. I did get a chance to. I saw about half of that Dazzle talk that you linked to, Roger.
Oh yeah.
Um, so I didn't get all the way through it, but I think I got a feel for the context as well. Um, so yeah, let's go ahead and open it up. Uh, to, yeah, any thoughts or questions, or what direction you want to go with it? Um, I know that I've been asked here mostly in my capacity as a talent buyer for small local venues, but also as a musician. But I think to speak to that uh, issue that the Dazzle talk was about, racial inequality in the sort of Denver booking and music scene, um, there's quite a lot of it. I think that pretty much sums up the issue.
Yeah,
uh,
and about half of the students here are in Detroit as well, because we in
okay.
yeah, because Dime Denver, its relationship,
Yeah.
well, with Metro went away, but the students had the option to keep attending Metro. So yeah, and so we can talk about Denver and we can talk about Detroit.
Okay. Well, I actually used to live in Detroit for a little while, or I was living between Ann Arbor and Detroit. Then in Detroit, right before moving out here, I used to play around in Hamtramck sometimes. Um, it was a lot of fun, but not there anymore. I'm sure it's changed a lot in the last 6 years. Um, one of the things that the panelists in that Dazzle talk mentioned that I think is very, very obvious and very true as far as racial equity in booking goes is there are no Black talent buyers in Denver. It's all me. It's all white guys, you know? And not to talk myself out of having a job, but that probably should change. I can do, the best that I can in trying to uh, program a wide array of acts and diverse acts for the Roxy and any other venue. But I think that there's always going to be something lacking in my approach to getting uh, getting non-white artists on the stage simply because of who I am. Like I can try my best, but I feel like there's just the same way it's important to have a diversity of voices on stage. I think the people behind that, it's also important to change that cast up a little bit and I don't know what the situation is in Detroit regarding that sort of thing, but Denver is
Hmm.
pretty across the board, uh, just white guys who are in charge of programming music.
Could you talk a little bit about what talent bind is exactly?
Oh, sure, yeah. Um, so basically, it's just sort of a jargony term. Like, so if a booking agent works for bands, like the booking agent is the person who reaches out on behalf of bands to venues and says, "Hey, my band, I've got Roger Green coming through town, and we'd really love to play at XYZ venue. Do you have any dates available in this range?" Then the talent buyer is the person who is that equivalent for the venue side. Like I hit up artists that I want to play at my venue, and I say, "Hey, are you guys available on this date? Here's the deal we can do for you," and like basically just negotiate the terms of the show, like how long is the set, what's the date, what time, how much money we can offer, all that sort of thing.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Just
Another, I think, important component of talent buying, which you have varying degrees of agency over the choices you make, depending on uh, depending on who you work for, but is the programming itself. Some owners are very controlling as far as what kind of music they want in their venues, and some are not. Usually, it's sort of a balance, and you have to book to the room, not to your taste. Uh, Roger will remember uh, one of my favorite shows that I was able to book from 4 or 5 years ago at a little dive bar in Denver. Um, Featured this guy Ralph White, who is a great uh, folklorist and like student of music. He's played with Thurston Moore, members of Swans, and is like a master of the fretless banjo. And I had him in town. He played beautiful music. Roger and another friend of ours, R.L. Cole, opened up the night, and it was great. But there were like 15 people there, maybe 10, because I booked to my taste. And that's very different from booking to the room. Like that was a punk dive bar, and the thing that did well there was punk rock. But I don't always want to listen to punk rock, so sometimes I wanted to scratch my own back.
Have you ever worked with any like R&B or pop artists?
Yes, R&B definitely. I currently, uh, I think that's a pretty wide umbrella. Um, and yes, I absolutely have and currently do. Um, and as far as pop, yes and no, because stylistically, some, not as much as other genres, just because of my personal taste, but also because I work for small venues, and pop, by definition, popular. So you're probably going to be working on a larger scale than I operate on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like Denver, I don't want to say bias, but maybe do you think Denver leans towards a certain type of sound, would you say? That's like kind of I would say, well, I don't know too much about the Denver scene, to be honest. I live here, by the way, which is like not good.
Okay.
I don't know much about the Denver scene, but what I know is like my friends, like the people who I know who play music. So like I would say there's like folk with inspirations of jazz, and then I would say like pop punk, and I would say like a lot of like EDM too. I would say is really
Hmm. Those are definitely all elements. I think that it depends largely what type of venue or concert or festival you incline to go to. Because, for example, Beatport is based regionally here, and they're like one of, if not the biggest EDM like portals in the world. But I don't deal in EDM usually. It's just not my world, so I don't really know very much about it. Uh, and then there's different scenes. I think that there is a fairly strong but dwindling punk scene, um, and that like there was, I think, early 2000s there was quite a lot more punk here, and now most of those people have kind of aged out of going to clubs, but there's still uh, places like Streets of London, and to a lesser extent Lions Lair, which I used to work for, that are still kind of bastions of the old guard of punk rock in Denver. Um, I think there's also obviously a huge jam scene regionally in Colorado. People love a style of music called jam grass, which I was not even aware of until I moved out here. But it's sort of like if you jammed but also played bluegrass, and people are very into that sort of thing. Um, and there's there's a lot of that kind of like country Americana rock vibe happening, of like you got your lead dude with your acoustic guitar, some guy who plays pedal steel but also electric guitar, and like a lady that sings backups, and a drummer and a bassist. Sorry, someone just put in a note that I cannot read, but if somebody would.
It says, this is John, I believe. In my experience, Denver is much more of a melting pot of different styles of music than the Midwest where I came from. I definitely agree. It's what venue you go to here that plays into what you're gonna hear by and large.
Yeah. um I think, like anywhere else, and this is actually one of the projects that I'm kind of getting more into and trying to start researching, that Roger mentioned earlier, uh, of what is a regional sound, like sort of an idea of what makes a Denver sound versus a Detroit sound. Not just styles of music like country versus soul, but also like the ambient noise of a place. Like, how does that affect the cultural product of it? Um, and I think that with regards to Denver, there are a lot of different styles of music here, but being a smaller place, it kind of stops for most venues, or for most genres, sorry. uh like, yes, there is a fair amount of rap in Denver, but it peaks out. There's only like a few really world class or national hip hop acts coming out of Denver. There are a fair amount of pop and Americana acts like One Republic, The Fray, Nathaniel, like that kind of thing. There's some jamgrass stuff like the something or other, the String Dusters. Um, but in my experience with Denver, as compared to someplace like New York or LA, where whatever you want, there's the best in the world there. Denver kind of, in general, tops out a little quicker than those places, which I think is why a lot of artists from here will move to Portland or LA for a few years and then come back. And I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn from other acts that are maybe doing something that they want to be doing on a slightly higher or more evolved level. Not sure if that answered the original question of what what is kind of a Denver sound, but yeah, I think it depends where you go, you know. There's a lot of different sounds here.
Thank you. No, that was great. I had another question about your approach to songwriting. I
Okay.
just kind of nothing specific. I just wanted to kind of hear like how you go about it, I guess.
Um, well, I think uh, it depends what your role is for me. Like as a band member, I'll approach writing very differently than I do for my own material. So as a band member, I think your job is uh, to kind of support and uh, flesh out what the other people are doing, what the person, the sort of like, for example, in Still Tide, Anna is the main writer of those songs, but I'll write my own parts and sort of work with her in shaping where the songs go, in the feel, in like putting together different parts in different ways, like what works, what doesn't, and we'll play with like different arrangements. Um, and that sort of, as a collaborator, I think your role is to collaborate. You know, try to figure out how to best fulfill the vision of the person who is starting the song, while also like adding your own personal touch to it, and bringing your voice in an bringing out your voice in a context of somebody else's structure, if that makes sense. And then for my own stuff, I think that uh, it really depends. You know, sometimes you get lucky and you just kind of blurt out a whole song, um, and other times you don't, and you have something that you just kind of noodle around with for a long time, and it never really gets a home until one day it does. I've been uh, trading lessons with Esme lately, as far as like I've been giving her guitar lessons, and been giving me singing and writing lessons. And one of the things that she started talking about, which I think is very, uh, very good, is kind of listening to your own song, like letting, like you don't have bad ideas, you just might have ideas that don't fit with that song, they belong somewhere else. um, and like listening to where the song wants to go and just letting it go there, you know, trying to fit what's right with it, sort of the same way I talked about as a collaborator, but just collaborating with yourself.
That's awesome.
Thanks. Do you have any other questions or comments? Okay, sorry, I'm on my phone, so Roger, if you wouldn't mind reading out those notes, I can't see the written comments. Sorry, my internet is total garbage, so I need to be like supported by my cell service.
How do you deal with conflict and collaboration?
Mm. Um, well, I think in any, I think it depends. You have to, first of all, understand the power dynamics of what environment you're working in. For example, when I was playing guitar for Esme, or when you get hired for a gig, your opinion on, like, there's one person who has the final word, and that's the person who hired you. You know, you can say, oh, I think it should go this way. I really like this vibe. But like if that person says it should go another way, then it goes that way. Um, because they're in charge, you know, they're the boss. Um, but I think in the context of, like, you have, you know, a shared, everyone's got an equal vote. uh I think you just try it all of the different ways. You know, I used to have a band that uh was a 5-piece rock band that everyone had like an equal share. We all had to agree on everything to move forward. It took forever to write songs. Um, but what we did was just try everyone's approach. Like, if the bassist said, like, no, man, I think this verse is stupid, we should play it way faster, then we'd be like, okay, let's play it way faster. And then we'd say, Adam, you're wrong, that doesn't work. You know, you gotta just be open to all ideas, because I think the beauty of a collaborative project is that you end up making something that is not any one person's vision, but is greater than the sum of its parts. So even if it's not your idea, it might end up being something that is much more interesting and unexpected than your idea. Also, one of the uh, key components of bands is, like, sometimes you have to have really dramatic band meetings. Like, bands love to have meetings. We're like, we need a band meeting, man. Um, and like, you have to fight about something that's really stupid. And that's like kind of the point of being in a band. And then you have to maybe go home and like talk your partner's ear off about like how your other bandmate is such an idiot, and they have to be like, oh my god, I so don't care. And then you just have to do that for a while, and eventually you'll resolve it.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
In the different contexts that you're when you're collaborating, Jake, can you talk about do you negotiate things like publishing, or how that agreement, like
Mm-hmm.
who gets credit, and um, the idea of possible future payment, or how do those discussions work differently in those contexts?
Right. um i think that uh I think that obviously it's different for every act. um and I don't know if you guys have talked about sort of the history of, have you guys touched on like the history of like publishing and rights and so on?
Not in this particular section. Some of the students have heard me talk about that in other contexts.
Okay.
Yeah, feel
Yeah.
free.
So I guess very briefly, there's a lot of different ways that uh, ownership of songs breaks down. um, Musicians are idiots, so you can own 200% of a song because that's how music is. You have 100% of the writing and 100% of the publishing. And if you own all of those things, you own 200% of a song. because we're great at math. Um, and that's just sort of the way it splits up. But in general, I think you have to you have to try to honestly assess, like, okay, did I write this part, or is this somebody else's idea and I'm just playing it, you know? Um, and usually the way, for example, on Esme's last record, I have partial writing on some things that I wrote a where I wrote the part and it's kind of a hook or an essential part of the song. But then I just get credited for performance if it's a line that she or one of the producers came up with. And uh, I just sort of realized it, you know? Um, I think that one thing that a lot of artists have trouble with, especially younger artists, is uh, like knowing their own worth. Like I have a good friend who's a bass player, and he's been, a kind of core writing member of a group for a long time with someone who he grew up with, but they play under that one guy's name, under the singer's name. Um, so my friend hasn't, he hadn't asked for any publishing or writing credit. And Anna and I were talking to him one day and we're like, hey, man, you really need to stick up for yourself here, because how bad are you going to feel if like one of these songs hits and you have, broken your back touring with this band and put in so much time and love and money into it, and you don't get even like a smallest percentage of royalties from it? Because let's be honest, for most of us, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about like, I don't know, $62 a year or something, But it's important to prepare for all situations. And it just feels nice to be acknowledged, to say, like, yeah, this is a formal record of my contribution to this thing. I am valued for my ideas and my participation, you know? I remember when I was a kid, my father was a musician as well, and he had stopped playing in his 50s, and he still got a royalty check from a record he had made in the early 90s that had been passed around from various companies. And one company went out of business, then someone else bought it up, and it was currently owned by some label out of England. And they sent him a royalty check for $1.12. And he said, wow, man, somebody's still buying this thing. Because this was like probably around 2000 or so. So it's like a 10-year-old album. Um, that was the kind of point being, that wasn't really a relevant amount of money, but it still gave him some pride to know that someone was paying attention to this album that he had worked on so long ago.
Yeah, I think that is super interesting, and something to think about too, in terms of if you're in a band and you're thinking about the hours of labor put into practicing and to supporting somebody, especially if it's somebody else's music. And it's something that implodes a lot of bands when they do, if they haven't talked about the publishing aspect beforehand, and then they start trying to parse it out because they've gotten some traction or something. And then there, you also just don't always know. Like last month, I got it. I got noticed that like I had 1,200 pounds from an old Czars song, because the money had been mistakenly going to the Cocteau twins for like 10 years. So it wasn't that much money like at one time, but I was like, well, hey man, I'll take like 1,200 British pounds. like, yeah, that's great. And it does, it makes you, it's like not going to change my entire life, but it, man, that really helped. Like, and it also, it's very affirming in that way. But then I've been seeing this more and more in like the hip hop world, for example, where writing credit is sometimes divvied up before they even go into the studio. And like, you know, you can get like a major, I mean, I'll take a big producer like Dr. Dre, for example. And Dr. Dre can get writing credit on something, and he's not on the track. He has nothing to do with the making of the actual studio work and the track, but it is sort of part of a crew type of situation or an umbrella kind of network. And I think that sometimes like the people who are like pick up an acoustic guitar and play and this is my song have a very individualistic relationship to what money and intellectual property is. And they could be really cynical about the way that the hip hop world is working. It's like, oh well, you didn't do anything. You're like, you've already decided who has all the percentages, and then it just happens to be that if a bass player in the studio comes up with a good hook, they'll like they'll throw him a percentage of the song, right? Which is a really different way of thinking about what writing is. But in some ways, writing is about compensation, or at least tracking that in a commercial culture. I don't know if you have thoughts about that kind of like, I mean,
Absolutely. I think that's pretty interesting. I didn't know about the sort of pre-division of rights, but it does make a lot of sense. Um, and I think also I actually just read a pretty interesting essay. I forget who wrote. Hang on. In this little like collection of books of essays called "Music, Space, and Place," um, and I read about there's two good there's an essay called "Positioning the Producer: Gender Divisions in Creative Labor and Value," which speaks a lot to the sort of inequity and misogyny of the producer to artist role as it relates to female artists in particular, where they're often stripped of agency and cast as this sort of like essentialized voice of like, that's just her voice, you know, this like natural thing, not something that's been like worked and crafted and suffered over, versus like where I think it was a um, was maybe a Bjork record that was being described as, or yeah, I forget who the artist was, but it was like, and so the review from some magazine was like, uh, and so can just let her voice go under the watchful eyes of producers, two dudes' names who I forget, you know, and it's a way uh, of sort of maintaining control for like to take away the artist's authority over her own material and to have the authority still sit with the men in charge. Um, that's not exactly addressing the point, but I just thought it was an interesting article that kind of applies. Absolutely. The essay is called Positioning the Producer: Gender Divisions in Creative Labor and Value. It's by a writer named Emma Mayhew. Um, sorry, I lost track. What was the original? Oh yeah, the division of uh, like writing percentages and so on. I wonder too, in the hip hop and pop world, how much, which is in general, I think a lot more forward thinking and progressive than the rock world, which is like pretty old fashioned in a lot of ways. Um, I wonder if that's a recognition also that some of these songs may never be performed live, because in the rock world we're always like, man, we got to get ready for the show, we got to go on tour, man. um, and so much of it is about live performance. But I wonder if you're crafting a studio song for like streaming or radio consumption, and you're not planning to take the band on the road, if that's a different way of recognizing it. Because as like a studio guitar player, you're like, well, here's my hourly, here's my day rate, and you get that. Maybe you get a writing credit if you write something, but then it's on the assumption also that like when that group tours, you will be hired on as the guitar player. But if that tour is never planned to happen, maybe that's another way of giving people allowing people to be invested in material past the initial session.
Yeah, I think it's a different way of thinking about community too, and I think you're right on and talking about that. Like, well, what is equity, right? Um,
Mhm.
like, so you know, it's been a few years, but I taught a hip hop and literature class a few years ago, and it's like when you look at a band like Public Enemy, which was a big band, like one of my first big concerts that I ever went to was Public Enemy. So they have a special place in my heart. And but it's like they're not just the band. It is not like there's a crew around the band, and yeah, there's Chuck D and there's Flava Flav, but Sister Souljah, who's a novelist who wrote Coldest Winter Ever and these other books, she was kind of part of the literary apparatus of what they were doing. And then they had other people just working on media and marketing and that kind of stuff because they didn't have it. I mean, eventually they got big, like major labels and stuff, but the idea is that aesthetically, it's not just about an individual artist, it's about community. And in that way, I think it's a really, I wonder, just how racialized the ways that people think about getting paid and giving back, like how that plays a part in what people think about in terms of their self worth or their music's worth.
Absolutely. I think that's a interesting point, especially regarding a group like Public Enemy, because they are so explicitly political,
Mm-hmm.
um, that so much of their message is about community, is about sort of uh, supporting their community. And I think you mentioned the very individualist aspect and attitude of the sort of traditional singer songwriter. Um, I think uh, that's a big part of like it's interesting to see the that idea of the crew or the community moving from political hip hop to straight pop,
Yeah.
um, and kind of uh, crossing ideological ideological lines to exist, to take like a something that's rooted in ideas of a combination of like black revolutionary ethos and like Afrofuturism to just pop music. That was actually the end of Jeff Chang's book.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Talks about that in, I think, a really smart, nuanced way. Can't Stop, Won't Stop. That like the like last few chapters where he gets into like the basically pop rap, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's easy to miss that when because after you get this entrepreneurial rap like Puff Daddy and like after and the early Jay Z stuff, this is kind of after Tupac and Biggie that the tragedy of those deaths. There's this shift towards the entrepreneur, like you know like um, of having, I have a record label. I'm a rapper. I have a record label, but I also have a clothing brand, or I have a media channel, or something like that. Where it's easy to kind of just like only see that in these kind of capitalist ways, but I think that there's probably a lot more of that revolutionary stuff going on, thinking behind it economically, if you make room for it. I mean, like
Absolutely.
Dead President is definitely a different kind of political sort of situation than someone like Jay Z, but um, they might be more overt, uh, just overt about their leftism, or about Marxist or communist leanings, but like um, still, I think that the breakdown of how things are, people think about getting paid and compensated for writing. Um,
Yeah, I think also you touched on something a few minutes ago, just the idea of uh, not just a political or uh, physical community, but the idea of creativity, of because we're kind of edging around the idea of like, what do you think about Creative Commons? You know, um, and I think it's fascinating. I think like there's, you know, we talk about originality and authenticity as these kind of holy subjects that like artists must be original, artists must be authentic, but like, I think our current notions of originality and authenticity are really rooted in this kind of neo-romantic thing of like the like generative impulse as being sort of redirected masculine procreativity impulse, and that's why we have like the creative genius model of like Bob Dylan and Beethoven and so on, as a guy who is just like pulling these things from his head. Um, when I think in fact it's a lot more nuanced than that, that like we are sharing ideas back and forth all the time, you know?
yeah. And well, you
Um,
brought up Bjork a few minutes ago, and you
mhm.
look at old. I remember it's kind of an old one now, but like a great interview she did with Charlie Rose. I mean, before Charlie Rose, he's gone now for probably good reasons. But he's talking to her about her singing and stuff, and she's like, yeah, generally I just do my singing in one take. I don't really think that much about it, but I can talk to you all day about different snare drum sounds, and but it's this kind of mystified concept of the diva, like singer, that kind of that like removes the idea of what a technician Bjork is as a producer, and how much she really knows exactly what she wants from, you know and like whether she's collaborating with Matmos or some other band, it's like that's fine too, but but it's that kind of mystified conception of the female as just the essentialized voice. um yeah.
Absolutely. I think that sort of essentializing impulse obviously exists across racial lines as well, where we talk about the blues as authentic music, and down to this sort of militant like folk traditionalists, which who often end up you know very problematically positioning themselves as guardians of entrenched racism, um, by talking about you know the pure and beautiful music of a pure and beautiful sort of noble savage ideal, um, and kind of reducing people to that. um, I think that's like, why do we see certain sounds or noises as more or less authentic than others? Why is why is like when James Brown grunts, why is that more authentic than like Cher singing into a vocoder? You know, like where do we pull these associations from? You know?
Mhm. Yeah. Jocelyn Keel, who goes by Joe Foke, she's in the Dazzle video. And so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of the students, because the module just showed up the other day, but that's in the module this week. That there's this week is themed in terms of race stuff. I gave a lecture on some stuff, but there's a talk from Dazzle as well. And this is what some of our African American women singers in Denver are saying is like, they get hired a lot of times to lend credibility to somebody else's stage performance by being like, you have got like three black women who are your backup singers in your blues band, and it lends a kind of quote authenticity to the performance. And she's talking about, she's like, I'm sick of this. Like, I want to be able to be hired to perform my own music, but instead booking agents are asking me like, well, I don't think people will come out to hear your music, but could you do like an Aretha Franklin tribute night? And then um, I don't know if you have thoughts about that, because that's a thing too. Like, clearly they're also talking about getting people into the club, right? But there's some seems to be something racialized about whether or not, at least in Jocelyn's case, or Joe Foke, her act, like the ability to be perceived as an artist that can draw in a crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. I did make it through that section of the talk, and I thought they were pretty right on in talking about the way uh, bookers will approach artists in that capacity. Um, I think there are like a lot of different facets to that conversation. Insofar as, one, I think that a lot of it is uh, implicit rather than conscious bias. It's people seeing a black singer as representative of this certain thing without knowing consciously that they are doing so. And I think that's something that needs to be kind of attacked and unpacked and talked about when it happens, so that folks who I guess so that you could distinguish between the actively racist and the simply ignorant, um, and hopefully, inform people who are perhaps ignorant of what they're doing. Um, and I think, unfortunately, we're talking about we're dealing with a racialized interpretation of art and capital,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because fundamentally, as as much as I hate it, uh, and kind of tired of it and looking to get out of this world, I and most of and all of the performers, really, anywhere, we're just glorified liquor salesmen. Like, our job is to put asses in seats and get them drinking. Like, that's how the venues make money, and our job is to make the venues money. Uh, and so, as with any commercial enterprise, people don't like taking chances. You want to stick with what you know. You want to stick with who you know. You want to stick with the crowd that you know is going to drink. Because I think it's not just, oh, we don't think you can draw. It's, we don't know what kind of crowd you're going to draw, is sort of implicit under that, I think. Like, are you going to draw a rowdy crowd, which they talked about regarding Cold Crush as like, that's just sort of code for saying black for a lot of people. Um, but then there are different types of crowds. There are drinking crowds, there are eating crowds, There are pot smoking crowds, there are loud crowds, there are quiet crowds. And I think one of the reasons that a lot of people push for cover music is because they know what kind of crowd it's going to bring. It's going to bring the kind of crowd that listens to, Jackson Brown and Aretha Franklin and whoever else, and like familiarity. Like people running a business focus on keeping the business afloat above all else, and you get people like uh, Jonathan that used to run Syntax, who focus on something else and their business gets into trouble. Like I think he did a really noble job of programming really kind of outsider music a lot of the time, but it was not a consistent business proposition, you know? And that's an endless source of frustration to me. I'm sure there are plenty of people who enjoy it, but like the people don't like taking chances when it comes to their pocketbooks.
Mhm. Yeah. And then there's leveraging, right? Like, so, I mean, before COVID, I used to go like have like a drink after work at High Dive down on South Broadway, and it'd be like a Friday night, and I'd sometimes get annoyed because they're like starting to take the stools away, and I don't like I just want to like sit and have a beer, and but they would have country night like like every maybe it was every Friday or like it was often, and I'd be like, oh, this band is so good, but why can't they play their own original music? I was just getting up in my own, little, you know, my own preferences for things, and then you realize that they're moving out the stools because they're gonna have a packed house, and that packed Friday night is gonna subsidize the other nights of the week where you have some touring band that's not drawing a bunch of crowd. Um,
Absolutely. That's one of the difficulties of being a venue in the world of COVID-19 is you don't have those anchor dates anymore because of limited capacity. So, for example, with my bar, Roxy, um, we used to have, we'd have dinner music from like 6 to 8, and then we'd have a ticketed show from like 9 till close. Um, and we could depend on and we'd have dance nights like Weird Touch and Mile High Soul Club. So, like, what we did was what everyone does, like that kind of leveraging where you depend on a few anchors. You're like, man, okay, I can book this unknown touring duo for a dinner gig on Thursday and help them out, give them, $100 or $200 and some food, and put them in front of a solid audience, even though they're not going to bring anybody, because I know on Saturday we're going to be sold out and just jammed all night. So we'll make our rent that month in that one night. Um, and I think the higher your cost of operating is, the more of those nights you need, and the fewer chances you can afford to take. Um, and as a result, the your programming gets less and less interesting. I think you can look at any one of the downtown, like 16th Street Mall, someplace like Appaloosa, for example. They exist totally on like cover bands for the most part, um, because they're a tourism spot. That's, you want familiarity. Like a lot of people want to go and eat a burger and you know listen to Cheeseburger in Paradise or whatever. Like we're not. I think you know uh, Roger, you and I have inclination of like I always would prefer to hear original music rather than a cover. Even if it's a terrible song, like even if it's like truly atrocious writing, I would prefer somebody's original attempt than to just hear like Angel from Montgomery over and over and over and over again, because literally everyone plays that song.
I've been talking back and forth with with you about some of this stuff, but are and looking at the time, it's 12:04, and
Mm.
I mean, are there more questions from students out there? Any of this sparking stuff, or even
I do have a question. My name is Donatella, and I was just wondering what your kind of week to week schedule looks like. Is it, and like how you incorporate music into your daily routine, and kind of how you have made like your week to week schedule surrounding music?
Totally. Good question. Uh, it's evolving. Um, I think that it looks very different now than it did pre-COVID, because I'm as I mentioned, working on applying to graduate programs as well. So I actually just made a schedule for myself that includes everything yesterday, because my therapist said that that was something that I should do. He was totally right. So basically, consistency. Um, even it's like the YouTube yoga ladies say, even a few minutes a day is better than 1 hour once a week. Um, so like basically, I try to do uh, I try to like set out certain times where like I know I'm going to do music this time for this long, and then choose what kind of music am I going to do. Am I going to be writing? Am I going to practice? How how am I going to approach that? Like when I was touring and like hiring on as a guitar player for bands, I would spend a lot more time practicing guitar, because like that was my job, was to be good at guitar. But uh, now, as that's not really an element in my life, when I sit down to do music, I focus on writing. I might not even pick up an instrument and just sit there and like try to write some lyrics to something, or like imagine a line. And also, I'm lucky enough to have a piano uh, right there, and it's great for me because I feel like often playing guitar on my own can feel very lonely. Uh, it can be, especially electric guitar, because like the kind of electric guitar that I like to play tends to be more kind of textural or complementary rather than a full thing on its own. So it really, I love that kind of this spark between musicians. But piano doesn't feel as lonely to play alone for me. So I love to just sit down and kind of noodle on the piano whenever possible. I think that if you're an instrumentalist, you should keep your instruments always available. Like, make it as easy as possible to get them. Like, don't keep them in a case, don't keep them under a bed. Don't, like, if you're like, oh man, I've got an idea, just go with it. Like, be able to grab it from wherever you are. Um, but in general, consistency over like, okay, like here I'm really feeling writing, let me sit down, I'm just going to write for like 6 hours today, and then not do it for 3 weeks. Like, you want to do um Haruki Murakami, the author, had a great sort of description of that like creative process, and how that works, where he said, I don't have more good ideas than anyone else. I've just worked to streamline the process of getting at them. Like if you see it as you're kind of mining for gold, then he had dug his mining tunnel, his mine shaft a long time ago, and all he had to do was walk down it and get to the vein of gold. Whereas someone like me, or I would imagine many of you, we're still working at like chipping away at all of the dirt and dust and crap that is between us and those ideas. So the more regular you make that process, the more effectively you'll be able to access those ideas when you want to.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Other questions for Jake?
You said you were in a band. What's your band's name?
Well, I don't know if I'm currently in a band because nobody's active due to COVID. Yeah. But I my like main ongoing project is called the Still Tide. Roger, you said you sent out a set of links, right?
There's a bunch of.
Oh, cool. I'll check that out.
Thank you. Please do. I hope you like it.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. Totally.
You bet.
Other questions? Anybody have like something about like songwriting or song publishing? Like you've put something out and you've negotiated it or had to negotiate how you're going to split up mechanical royalties or publishing royalties, any of that stuff? I know a lot of the students have released things on to Spotify or.
Hey there, I have a question.
Yeah. Thanks, Zane. Yeah.
So I'm registered through BMI, but I understand that in order to receive actual royalties, there's like other corporations you kind of have to team up with or make an account with.
How do you mean?
Like, in one of my classes, I think last semester or 2 semesters ago, we talked about this website, Sound Exchange. And I'm not really sure what it does, but we all made an account. And I was looking through it the other day, and they're saying like they're kind of like the middleman between those like distributors or whatever the BMI and ASCAP labels are and the actual money for the artist. And that's where you can claim like your 200% or whatever.
I'm not aware of Sound Exchange, but as far as I know, you don't need one of those middlemen. You can have, I'm ASCAP myself, but I can go onto my ASCAP account and I can see, ooh, I have 12 cents in mechanicals. Gotcha. And I can, not collect that because it's too small for them to pay. But
okay.
I don't believe that you need someone to, the job of ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC they're royalty collection agencies. So gotcha. You should be able to access them directly.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, which is a little bit different than, having a, like a publishing company, right?
Yeah.
So we just went, my publishing just went from this little company called Blue Mountain under COVID. It just kind of like got bought out by Universal. And it's not because of my work particularly, but because of my former songwriting partner, John Grant, from the Czars, is he's made a good name for himself and makes a living doing it. And because of that, the back catalog of the Czars sold. But like, it is helpful to have like a team of people like in a publishing company, because they were like, it was exciting for us because it was like, oh, well, there's people at Universal who are fans of the Czars, and they might be more active in placing or helping get your like, you know, if somebody's like making a movie and they want to place a song from the movie, then you get like, you know, a team of people that are working on behalf, because they benefit themselves as a publishing company for getting your music out there. um, and just having like ASCAP or BMI and like it means that you there's a place for them to send money, but people don't always report well, and there's like mistakes, like nobody was being a jerk when they like that was telling you guys about the Cocteau Twins money. It was just like before Bella Union, our record label, was trying to do the publishing too, and they just made a mistake at some point in time, and it just went for 10 years. um, so it is nice to have people focus on your publishing, not like outside of the mechanical thing as well. There's also some differences between England, where my record label is based, and the US, but that's not really pertinent here.
Absolutely. I think if you are lucky enough to have a publishing deal, that can really be, that's in a lot of ways that's the most important thing financially for artists these days, because labels, uh, important maybe, but most sadly, again, we live in a world of capital. Artists make money off of licensing. The way, like, remember when Nathaniel first started to hit a few years ago, and he did that, like, what was it, like Kia or Nissan or whatever commercial?
Yeah.
um and you're like, oh, okay, now he's got money. It doesn't matter how many, you know 3,000 seat theaters you sell out. Real money comes from commercial licensing. um that's just an unfortunate truth of the world we live in. So having a publishing and licensing arm to your world can be great. There are some online. Uh, I know that, oh man, Sean from Devachka, I think, was doing a Colorado based licensing group. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's
Like Color Wheel, is that?
Color Wheel. Yep, him and
Yeah.
Jeff Linsmeyer, who used to be the drummer in my old band. Uh,
Yeah.
and Jeff's like does drums for like Kenny Chesney, or so. He's it's some huge
Oh, yeah.
like he's like he lives in Nashville now, but they do have Color Wheel, and it's something that students, especially those of you who are like kind of making textural music, it becomes like a bank of sounds that you know, it's a marketing agency, and you know, but if they use your sounds, then you can get sort of paid. um, I sent them a whole, just like a couple of CDs of just weird guitar music, or CDs, just a bunch of MP3 files. um, but yeah, I think that that's a way to think about it for sure. um, Also, but if we go back to, I mean, I know we're getting kind of close to the end of time, but I think to go back to what Jake was saying earlier about like there not being, you know, booking agents of color in town right now. I think the same concept applies to something like publishing or collecting, that um, that kind of stuff. I mean, you can see, like, I watched a documentary on Trojan Records a few weeks ago, and like early, you know, reggae stuff, like how that all exploded, which was good, but it was always focused on just the mechanical of the selling the albums. But we need to think about it in the publishing way too. Um, yeah, and that's kind of like, so we've been having, Jake, this ongoing conversation in class about like, okay, so COVID is changing everything, right? And sometimes for bad and sometimes possibly for good. And it's changing all of our social relationships and how we do shows and how we negotiate public space. And like, you know, this week is the theme of this week is definitely racial inequity. When you go into the modules, like, are there ways that we can reconceive on the other side of COVID or whatever, and on the other side of like national attention to the movement for Black Lives, for example, are there ways that we can think of more equitable ways of doing all the music stuff? Because like a lot of times musicians just like they want to pretend that we're all like cool and we all love each other, and I'm sure that there's a lot of that feeling, but that doesn't mean that racial or gender and equity doesn't cross all of our paths and our embodiments.
Absolutely. I think that, I was thinking about that, watching this Dazzle talk of, uh, what's the goal really? Like, because I can say, well, I'm doing my best to program a diverse array of artists touching on, you know, any and all genders, races, ethnicities, and styles. Um, but when, what's my goal there? Like, how many do I have like a kind of personal affirmative action type of program, or is it like who's deciding when it's good enough or not good enough? Like if I program based on the demographics of the Denver metro area, my calendar is still super white. Like I was looking at uh, the, I think it was from a 2018 piece, like survey. As I recall, the Denver metro is 65-ish% white, 5% black, 4.5% Asian, 0.5% American Indian, and 22% Latinx. Um, so if my programming reflects that, it's really not very diverse at all. But that's why I think it really is a big problem that there are so few non-white, non-male programmers, and like Roger was saying, record labels and publishing companies and licensing groups, um, because I'm I can do my best, but I'm not the person who should be deciding that stuff. So uh, I think that it would be great to have, I don't know, some kind of goal or concrete objective for someone like me to look at and say like, okay, well, this is what is being asked for. Am I meeting that? Am I exceeding that? Or am I falling short of it? Rather than just looking within myself and trying my best, you know?
Anybody have ideas for what those objectives might be? Because Lisa, as I told you at the beginning, Lisa Gedgaudas came, the first week of classes, and was talking about all of related issues, but actually access to money and how like when we're thinking about money and public space, and even though Arts and Venues Denver is kind of going to go on furlough from October to January, she's trying to pass out that money, from those grants, and like I do think that we're in this moment, like if we think of this class as a community, even if it's communities in Detroit and Denver, like we have to kind of make the new thing as the songwriters ourselves. Like we have a hand in whatever that future is going to be, um, and it's an open conversation there. Like any students have thoughts about that? Okay, well, so you'll them just for the students, you'll notice that the modules I made for this week, the modules are very much directly related to issues of especially racial inequity this week. There's a little bit of gender discussion, but it's mostly racial stuff, and it ties into themes like from the VJ Iyer talk that he gave about classical music and space in the earlier lectures, and from my lectures on the Black Arts movement and like Anthony Braxton and that kind of stuff. Like what makes writing? I think the concept of what writing is very much a white European concept. Definitely the concept of the author as somebody who gets paid comes from white European culture. It comes from Christian culture actually, and it was a way to keep account of to make somebody accountable for heresy. Is where our concepts of copyright and authorship come from, is actually to punish the person, not for them to benefit. And then in the Romantic era, as Jake was alluding, it becomes this kind of original genius kind of thing. Um, so yeah, thinking about like different ways of what writing is. And then I know there's not explicitly in my module lectures and discussions, not everybody's talking explicitly about songwriting, but I think that it really is, and it cuts across our embodiments, for sure. So please watch the modules. Is what I'm saying. And there's writing exercises due this week, and then after this week, just be writing your own songs because we start into workshop phases, for the next several weeks. Like the weekly homework is really going to be about you guys turning in your own work and responding to each other, and then we'll continue these kinds of informal dialogues with people in the community. Any other questions before we part for today? All right. Thanks very much, Jake, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Next week, I think it is Aaron Roberts from Porlolo next week, who Jake has also worked with. It's either Aaron or it's Carmen Sandim, who is a jazz pianist and composer and songwriter, and I can't remember who's who, but yeah. Have a good day, and we'll see you all next week. And thank you again, Jake.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.